Hello, welcome back to another episode of Woodnote Studio. Today I'm going to be making an end grain 3D cutting board, but I'm going to do something a little different. I realize that there are two different ways to make these. One using parallelograms or rhombuses, and another way using a longboard method. I thought it would be helpful maybe to anyone out there who's looking to make an end grain 3D cutting board to know which method is easier, which one produces less waste, maybe which one is quicker, and which one, if either, has a better result, a tighter pattern, less gaps, what have you. So I'm going to make the exact same board using two different methods. And we'll see which one looks better and which one has the better results in each of those categories. Stick with me to watch and let's find out the results at the end. But let's get started.
The first thing I do is I plane and joint the three boards. So like I said, we have cherry, maple, and walnut. These are the only three boards that I'm actually using for this entire project. So taking that into consideration, I don't include the milling time in the final time of the making of the cutting boards. And just to let you know, if you like either one of these methods that I'm using to make either one of these cutting boards, I've created plans on my website and I'm giving them away for free. So I have the links below. You can go to my website, go check them out and download them and give them a try for yourself if you'd like. Okay, so the first cut is the maple board. I cut that at a perfect square, so whatever the thickness of the wood is how wide I cut it. Then the maple board is used to determine the distance from the fence to the saw blade at a 45-degree angle for the walnut and the cherry. This way it will create that pattern and those 45-degree angles will fit into each other. And then we glue everything together, fitting our two 45-degree angles together and then fitting that square piece in the center there. That's one glue up down and two to go. After I take them out of the clamps, I do a very light sanding just to make sure that there's no residual glue left on the boards. And we want these to fit together really nice and tight. Now, since I cut each of the three glue ups in half, I now have 6 boards that I can glue together to get the next step for the pattern. I must leave the glue bottle open once in a while because I have a hard time squeezing that glue out after I use it the first 2 or 3 times. And what I realized is I took the top off and saw that there was this big plug of glue in the top of it. So I had to clean that out and found out that, oh, it's a lot easier to now squeeze out. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that until after this entire project was done. Yay me! And just remember when you're clamping your cutting boards together, you don't want to over tighten your clamps. Otherwise it'll squeeze all the glue out and they'll be a little bit more weak than you want them to be.
I'm about to do something that's probably going to drive quite a few of you absolutely insane. However, hear me out. I'm going to take my cutting board, which I scraped off most of the glue. I'm going to put it through the planer. This is face grain, we're not at end grain yet, but there's a little bit of unevenness on these boards. Now, I know I have to be extremely careful and I'm going to take very, very light passes to get this nice and perfectly even and not to take off too much. I mean, I'm going for about a millimeter here so that it doesn't affect the pattern that we're going for when we cut this and flip it. So I'm going to go extremely light here, then I'm going to flip it over, and I don't have much to worry about because the pattern's not going to get affected on the other side, but I'm still going to try and keep it very light. Again, this is my journey. I have no idea if I'm going to mess this thing up royally or if I'm going to save myself a ton of time. Fingers crossed, here we go.
And here we go. Spoiler alert, it goes off without a hitch. This would have been preferably done with a drum sander, but considering the fact that I don't have one, I end up using the planer. Now, because of the thickness of this board, I couldn't use my crosscut sled, so I had to use my miter gauge. I cut a thin strip off just to get the end of this square and almost took my face off. Did you see it fly by? Here's a slow motion view of that. That was a close one. Always stand to the side. This way, if something like that happens, you're not putting yourself in danger. Now, I set up a stop block against my fence so that I can take repeated cuts to cut this to the thickness of what I want my board to be. And then I can repeat over and over again and make sure that they are identical. Oh, and I tricked the wife into helping me with spreading the glue to make it go quicker. I think I promised her that she could give me back rubs. Or maybe it was the other way around. Who can remember? Now the key to this is lining up your pattern so that they are as perfectly in line as they possibly can. Because once they're glued up, you're not going to be able to move them. And you want those lined up to give it that three-dimensional effect. Okay, now once it's out of the clamps, we scrape off any of the big clumps of glue that are on the top or the bottom. I use a chisel to do this. It makes it a little bit easier and faster to go through. And then we take the extremely long process of sanding it down. I start off with a belt sander because there's a little bit of unevenness that I need to get down. And I can't use the planer because that's going to probably cause some chip out and it could destroy the entire board. So belt sander it is. And then I use my Orbital sander to start getting to the finer sanding. Now before I finish going through all the different grits of sandpaper, I take it over to my crosscut sled and I square up all the edges to get it to the final dimensions. And boy, do I need to clean my saw blade. There is a lot of smoke coming off that thing, and it's not that old. Now if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, that's a nice looking cross-cutting sled, well, you're in luck, because I actually have plans on my website for sale for you to build this exact same one. So click on the link below in the show notes and you can purchase the plans to build one yourself. All right, and then back to sanding. I go through most of the grits and then I take it over to the router table and give it the round over, and I put in the handles as well. And then I do the final finish sanding up to 220 grit with water popping in between, just to make sure I raise any of those fibers to get them sanded off as well. As I'm putting the handles in, I make sure that I take small passes at this and keep erasing that router bit little by little. I don't want to go too deep, otherwise I end up tearing out the inside of the board, and nobody wants that. All right, and now it's everybody's favorite time. Getting the gloves on and putting on the oil. This is the end result of cutting board number 1. So I actually use walnut oil for the cutting boards, and then I use a walnut board butter after this soaks for an hour.
All right, now that the first cutting board is complete, I'm going to make the second cutting board. It is going to be very similar. It's going to be a 3D end grain cutting board, but we're going to use the rhombus style method. So with that method, all I need is a 3 pieces, 46 inches in length, which I have a little over 49¼ inches here for the walnut, cherry, and the maple. And they're going to be cut at a 30-degree angle on both sides, with the dimensions being all the same size. So I have enough here. The only waste that we are going to have is I'm going to make this 45-degree angle and cut a 30-degree on on these two, which that's going to account for the waste. And then because this is a 90-degree angle on the maple, we're going to get waste from that as well. But I only need one of each to be able to make a cutting board that is 1.5 inches thick.
Oh boy, were mistakes made on this one. Make sure your angles are absolutely perfect, and make sure your measurements are perfect as well. I can't say that I did that, at least not on the first try. Alright, so these cuts at the table saw I'm making are the 30-degree angles that I want to add on to them. There's waste that is not shown at the end of the video from those cutoffs. I don't know what I did with them, so that's probably why I neglected to show those near the end, so you could just take that into consideration. Now, as long as all 4 sides are exactly the same size, you can go and continue with your glue up. I use tape as clamps, which makes it a lot easier than trying to fit clamps in all 6 different directions, or all 3 different directions. This actually wasn't that bad, but make sure they're nice and tight.
All right, so everything was glued up. What I realized after I cut the 3 strips, the angle and the measurements that I made weren't precise, and they didn't make a perfect rhombus square. So I tried to plane it and recut it, and I ended up with this, which is, it fits together really well, and it's nice and tight, and it's perfect. I did the glue up, everything's great, except that it is practically half the size of what I need it to be to make the cutting board. So I recut everything. I made sure I was precise on the measurements. I measured out the sides exactly and perfectly to make sure that the top of the square was the exact same size as what the side of the square was. Anyway, I got another one together, nice and tight, it fits together. It's a great thickness. I can cut it at 1.5 inches and get enough to make a cutting board out of this. So, lesson learned, you got to make sure your measurements are very exact on this. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. So, let's continue. And I'll just end up with a smaller cutting board with a smaller pattern on top of the one that I want to do correctly. Not to mention, this took half the time because I didn't have to mess around with trying to plane it down like I did with this one.
Now, I'm cutting off the end of this just to get a nice flat reference piece, and then I'm going to make my cuts at 1.5 inches. You can do this on a crosscut sled or at the miter saw. I just had the miter saw set up, so that's where I did it on there. And then I make sure I sand off any little burrs that are on the ends of the hexagons so that everything fits together nice and snug. Yeah, after I put it all together, I realized this cutting board is going to be extremely small. So I had to cut all my pieces in half.
All right, so this one's a little tricky. Luckily, I learned a lot before and cut these incorrectly. So I had to shave them down and cut them, and ended up putting them together, and I learned a lot from that glue up, because my goodness, that's a pain in the rear end, trying to keep this PG. So what I ended up with was this mess of a board that has tons of holes in it. I don't know if you can see all the gaps that are in this glue up, because again, with this method of making a cutting board, it has to be absolutely perfect. Otherwise, you end up with all these different gaps in all these different sections, and for this one, it's just too wide. Not to mention, this is tiny. I mean, this is going to end up as a trivet or something like that. Again, I learned from that, realized what I needed to do with this one, and what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to try and do maybe 2 or 3 rows of the glue up, but I'm going to keep all of these together and then squeeze this from all 4 directions so it'll mock the glue up and the pressure from all sides with all the pieces in where I'm going to glue them up. Whether or not that's going to work, we're going to find out, but I'm hoping it works better than the last one, so that we can end up with an actual cutting board from this one. I know I'm going to have a lot of sanding to do afterwards anyway.
Well, now would be a great time for you to hit that like and subscribe button. This way in the future, as I grow, you get to see me make less mistakes and better works of art. Or at least that's what I'm going to call it. Then I glue up 2 to 3 of the rows at a time, clamp it up, and repeat. Such a painful process. I will spare you of hours more sanding footage. Just know I went through all the grains, water popped in between. Then back over to the crosscut sled to get it to the final dimensions. I'll link the build video for the crosscut sled at the end of this video, because obviously you want to finish watching this one before you watch that. Now, because I made the thickness of this board 3/4 of an inch, I couldn't put the handle in like I did last one. So I decided to put a 45-degree chamfer on the bottom to make it easy for you to pick up. I also got a little bit of sanding left to do. You can see the glue marks on the top of this board. And then I also sand off the sharp edges, just kind of give it a little bit of a round over. And then that's the completion of cutting board number 2. Nothing left but a little bit of oil work for your viewing pleasure.
All right, so what are the results? Right off the bat, if you want to know what my opinion is on what the best way to make a 3D end grain cutting board, an end grain 3D cutting board, I'm going with the Longboard method, which here's the result. Now, here's the thing. This is a thick cutting board. It is heavy, it is beefy, but I just think this is going to hold up really, really well. And if you're off in any way in your pattern, which there are some very minute mistakes in this pattern, but they're tight and they are close together and there's no gaps, and it was very easy to do the glue ups on. This one, however, the Rhombus method, yeah, it looks good, but making those hexagons and then trying to cut them and then glue all those little individual pieces together, that was a nightmare. That was so insanely difficult. Honestly, I would never choose to do that again. Now, let's get into the length of time. How long did it take me to make this one? How long did it take me to make this one? In total, the first one, what I'm calling the Longboard method, it took me a total of 8.5 hours to make this. However, I also had enough leftovers to make a whole another practically half of a cutting board, which could be used as a charcuterie board or another smaller cutting board. The Rhombus method, or Rhombus cutting board, took me 6 hours and 15 minutes. Again, did I have any left over? No, I didn't have any left over on that. But I started making this. And if you can see, there are a lot of gaps in this. And this was kind of like a learning mistake that I ended up with. Yeah, it kind of looks cool, whatever. I guess it has the 3D cutting board, but it's so terrible because of the amount of gaps that are inside of this. So I'm going to use it as a trivet. At least, not throw it away and make it go to waste. Now, you might look at it and say, well, this is like 2 hours less than what this was. And the reason that I think this took me 2 hours less is because I was using just the palm sander and a battery operated belt sander for this. I brought out the big plug-in belt sander, which was insanely more powerful to sand this down to get this flat and then work my way up through the grits on this one. So if I would have done that with this easily probably would have shaved off another hour at least on these. All right, the other thing I wanted to compare was the amount of waste that this produced. What I started with were 3 boards, a maple, a cherry, and a walnut. Okay, here's the leftover of the boards. They're all an inch thick, and they were all about 50 inches long. However, the maple was 10 inches wide, the walnut was 6 inches wide, and the cherry was 6 inches wide. This is what I have left over from making these 4 cutting boards, or these 2 cutting boards and these other ending results. However, I did cut these in a very specific way to minimize waste. If that's right, minimize? Minimal? To create minimal waste. The amount of waste that was produced from this style, the Rhombus style cutting board, was this pile here, okay? And then you see the leftover wood from that. But this is also waste because I did this and then I had to restart the entire thing over and then do this. So this is the amount of waste technically that I've gathered from this. This Longboard style of cutting board, 3D end grain cutting board, was with this pattern. It's really just this. I mean, it was just this little bit of waste and then whatever the leftover wood was. So I used quite a bit more to make this style, and was able to generate a lot more out of this. So I just think that this style is so much more, or this style is so much more wasteful than what this is. Now, the other thing is there's another method of creating this type, which is closer to more of a longboard. And I didn't go with that method because there's not as many people that did that. But the reason I went with this is because I thought this was going to be the easiest. And the reason I thought it was going to be the easiest is because on the channel This Old House, they decided to do it with the rhombus style for some reason. I think it was a little misleading on the type of ease. And again, I'm not faulting them for it, but I look at that channel and think, oh, they're a great channel to recommend things. I think they could have shown a different way of making an end grain 3D cutting board using a style similar to what is shown on King's Fine Woodworking channel. I know they have plans for that, and it's more similar to a long grain cutting board, but their method is, I can't say it is easier, but it looks like it's quite a bit easier than what the rhombus method is. However, it does look like they produce a lot more waste because of the angles that they cut, and then they have to cut it off to make it flat so that they can do the glue up. But again, it's a lot easier and you're going to end up with a better, tighter result because of it. On the other hand, the materials, I've used Type-On 3 for the glue ups, and I think I used a significant more amount of glue on this long grain style of cutting board for the glue up than I did with this. And again, I think that's because these are my first cutting boards that I've ever made. In my conclusion, you might disagree with me and you might say, I did this wrong. And if I did, please let me know, because you just saw me make them. The only thing I really cut down on timing was sanding, because we've all seen cutting boards sanded. It takes forever, especially something like this, especially end grain. So what I did do was I created the plans of the methods that I used to make these cutting boards, and I'm going to have a long grain cutting board plan and a rhombus cutting board plan, and I'm going to put them on my website, and they're going to be free. I am not charging for these. They're going to be simple plans. They're going to show the cut lists, what to cut, gluing them up, sanding them, and then kind of a loose affiliation on whether or not you want to put handles in the sides, if you want to do a round over on the edges, if you want to do a 45-degree cut. That's going to be up to you. If you're looking to do this pattern with a longboard style of making it, I would recommend going over to King's Fine Woodworking. They have plans for sale over there. You could buy them over there. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I'm sure they have no idea that I'm making this video, and then I'm actually recommending their plans. I have no idea on how easy those plans are to follow or anything like that, but it looks like the results come out a lot better and a lot easier than the rhombus method that I tried to use. Why didn't I buy those plans and then use those plans to make a style like this? Because after making these 2 cutting boards and spending probably somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 18 hours on making these, I was a little 3D end grain cutting board wiped out. So I did not want to do a whole nother cutting board for that. I kind of want to move on to do another project or something else to switch it up. You could download both of these for free, whatever, check them out, and then you can test them out. And if you do test them out or do try one or the other, you know, shoot me a message on here. Let me know what you thought of the plans, what you thought of the method, or, you know, just tell me what you think of the results. Now, the other final thing is which one looks better. That's tough because I do think they both look really cool. I guess I would kind of lean towards this one, but sometimes this one, I don't know, this one just kind of looks a little better sometimes too. So it's tough to say, but I guess if I'm going to pick one, I would end up picking this one. That was a tough challenge on this. So I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you on the next one.